Hi friends, I hope everyone's doing great. I've been asked by quite a few people how I do my fried rice. So I thought that I would take a minute just to show a few of you what I do. I am certainly not an expert in this. These are mostly just tips that I've learned over time that I think are gonna really help y'all with your fried rice. So I'm gonna show you a little tutorial on how I prep my rice and how I cook my rice so you'll get proper, authentic fried rice. So first of all, you want to make sure that you use really good rice. So I use jasmine rice, authentic jasmine rice from Thailand. We have found that it makes all the difference in the world. Now, if you're using minute rice or something, that's fine too, but it's very, very important that you make it the day before. You absolutely need to make it the day before because you want to dry it out. So the ratios for rice, we found that one cup of dried rice turns into about 3 cups of cooked rice. So it grows about 3 times. So 1 cup per 1 cup of water. So you want to do equal cups rice to water. Now again, if you're using minute rice, just use the method on the package. But I'm going to show you how I prep my rice. It's very important that you get rid of as much of the starch as you can. So once again, 1 cup of dried, 1 cup of water, quality rice. And you're going to need a really good quality pot and a strainer if you have it. And I'm going to show you how we first start to prep our rice. All right, so the first thing that I'm doing is I'm just filling it up, and it doesn't matter how much you put in. I'm just trying to get rid of as much of the starch as I can. So obviously you want to wash your hands before you do this. So I'm just kind of rinsing it out, and you'll notice that it's kind of white. So it's really, really starchy. So we're gonna do this 4 or 5 times. And what we found is kind of the easiest way to do it is to get yourself a strainer and just hold the strainer up against it. And you don't have to be real precise. Shake that rice back down. And you're gonna do this, like I said, about 4 or 5 times until the water runs clear. So you notice the more I do this, the more clear that water becomes. So we're getting rid of that starch. If you don't do this, your rice is gonna become kind of mushy, kind of wet. So you want to try and get rid of as much of that starch as you possibly can, so that when you cook it, it's not too wet. Okay, so if you notice now, most of that starch is gone. The water's looking pretty clear. I've done this is I think the 5th or 6th time that I've done this. Just takes a few minutes, but notice now it's running clear when I strain it. And the last time you do it, you want to get rid of as much water as you can. Be careful when you do this that you don't dump all your rice in the sink. I've done that before. That's not fun. So try to get rid of as much water, because now what you're going to do is you're going to measure your water. And we've already done that. So once again, 1 cup of rice, 1 cup of water. If you're making it just for rice, like as a side dish, you do 1 to like 1 1/4. But for fried rice, you want to try and do equal parts. And then, so now I've got my 1 cup of rice, 1 cup of water. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my stove here, and I'm going to turn it on to medium heat. I don't want to go too hot, because you don't want to burn your rice. You don't even need to let it heat up at all. In fact, it helps if you put it on a cold burner. because then it won't fry the bottom of your rice. It won't get black. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let it simmer at medium for just a couple of minutes until you see it kind of bubbling and simmering. And once that happens, then I'm going to go down to low, and I'm going to put my lid on it, and I'm just going to leave it alone for 15 to 20 minutes. You don't need to touch it. You don't need to do anything. Leave it alone for 15 to 20 minutes. At this low setting, it's going to take time to cook, but it's not going to burn. You're not going to get any burnt, charred bits on the bottom that's going to ruin your rice. So just leave it alone 15 to 20 minutes. And what we're going to do is we're going to come back to it in 15 minutes. I'm going to show you whether or not you need a little more time, show you how to tell whether or not it's done. Okay? All right, so if you look right now, my rice is starting to simmer, starting to bubble up just a teeny tiny bit. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower my temperature and just let it continue to simmer. I'm gonna let it do that for about 15 minutes, and I'm gonna check it then. It can go 15 to 20 minutes depending on how hot your stove is, but you're just gonna leave it alone. Leave it covered, leave it alone. Set your timer for about 15 minutes and we'll check it again. And remember, like you may be wondering, well, how much rice do I cook? This is 1 cup of uncooked rice, which is gonna make about 3 cups of cooked rice. That's for us, like 4 portions. That's a lot of rice. So if you're doing like half a cup, which you can do the same method, but just use half the amount of water. So whatever amount you're doing, do equal amount of water. So I'll come back to you in about 15 minutes. All right, so I have cooked my rice now for 15 minutes. So now I'm gonna show you how you know whether or not your rice is fully cooked. So what you're gonna do is you are going to check your rice, and the first thing you want to look for is if there's any action going on in the pot. If there's no bubbling, if there's no movement, it's probably a good sign that it's done. But what you want to do is you want to push aside the rice, and you'll look down there and see if there's any moisture down there. And if you see any liquid, any water down there, then what you do is you just pat it up and put the lid back on top. But I know that on my stove at this temperature, 15 minutes is perfect. So this is done now. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna just set this aside and let it cool for just a few minutes. And then I'm gonna transfer this over to like a tray. And you could put it in a bowl, but because it's gonna sit overnight, it tends to kind of stick together. And so you want to make sure that you try and spread it out as much as you possibly can so that it dries fully. So like the top layer doesn't dry, but the bottom's still moist. So preferably something flat that you can spread it out. You can even spread it out on a plate. You're going to put that in the fridge overnight, 24 hours, and uncovered. You don't need to cover it up. So put it in your fridge, let it sit overnight, and then the next day, then we can do our fried rice. And finally, I want to add. I think I made some kind of comment about using minute rice. Don't use minute rice. Use proper rice. So now I've transferred this over to my little dish, and I'm going to put this in the fridge overnight. And one more thing. When you cook rice, it should smell really, really, really delicious. So if you're not cooking proper rice, it's not really going to smell like much of anything. But if you're cooking proper jasmine rice, it will smell up your kitchen and it'll be absolutely amazing. So open the bag, and if it smells like jasmine, it's good rice. Okay, it's prep time. So we have let our rice dry out in the fridge overnight. And the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that you take your rice out and you break it apart, because it's going to stick together and clump up in the fridge. And so you want to take it out and just kind of crumble it up in your hands so you have nice individual grains. Otherwise, you're going to have to break it up with a spatula in the pan, and it's going to sit in the pan a little bit longer and it could potentially burn. So you want to make sure that you crumble it up really, really good before you start cooking. And then obviously you can put whatever ingredients you want. We've got some onion here. This is a yellow onion. And if this looks like a lot of veggies, it is because I'm making a double batch. So we cut up an onion, and then I cut up some, these are shiitake mushrooms. And the one thing that's really important about when you cut your vegetables is that you try and make them pretty similar in size. You don't want to have things that are really big and then things that are really, really small, because then they cook at various times. And you want to make sure that they all cook at the same rate. So make sure that all of your ingredients are about the same size. This is gailan, or Chinese broccoli, or sometimes called Chinese kale. And we really like this better than regular broccoli because it has a really nice crunch, and it cooks up really quickly. And it doesn't have the florets like broccoli does. And we just really like the flavor. It's a little more mild, we feel, than regular broccoli. It's kind of a cross between broccoli and broccolini. And you can get this at your local Asian market. It's pretty easy to find, but you don't have to use that. You can use any kind of veggies you want. And this is just frozen peas and carrots. We keep that on hand because we use them all the time. And we've got some green onions here. We just like them in pretty much everything we cook. So we cut up some green onions. And this is, I believe it's 4 cloves of garlic, which again, we're gonna split into 2 separate batches. Now, as far as our seasoning is concerned, this is oyster sauce. And any proper fried rice is going to contain oyster sauce. Now, because I'm a vegetarian, I had to order this special, but I found this actually online. Got this from Amazon. So this is a mushroom oyster sauce, so there's no oyster in it. But you can find regular oyster sauce at pretty much any grocery store. It's pretty easy to find. And if not, go to Amazon. But I think HEB even carries this. Our local grocery store carries this. And then this is a really good Thai thin soy sauce, a mushroom soy sauce. You can get, obviously you can get any kind of soy sauce, but I encourage you to get a really, really good quality soy sauce. It really makes a difference in your cooking. And then again, fish sauce. This is more of a Thai ingredient, but we like to use it. It adds a lot of really nice umami to it. Again, this we got also on Amazon because again, as a vegetarian, I wanted to make sure that I had a vegetarian or vegan version. So this is vegan fish sauce, but you can find fish sauce pretty much again at any grocery store, if not Asian market. Teeny bit of sesame oil. You don't want to use a lot of sesame oil. It can be very overpowering. And so just as far as amounts, I've got a tablespoon. This is for a single serving, by the way. A tablespoon. So a tablespoon of oyster sauce, a tablespoon of soy sauce, and then half a tablespoon of fish sauce, and a teaspoon of sesame oil. And then as far as spices are concerned, this is 5-spice powder. And this is in pretty much any really good Chinese food. It's very common. And it has fennel and coriander and clove and star anise and celery. And it is really, really commonly used. So if you ever go to an Asian restaurant and order fried rice, you're probably gonna have this inside of it. And this is white pepper. If you have never used white pepper before, trust me, you don't want to use too much of it. We have 1/4 teaspoon of 5-spice and white pepper. You can use black pepper and that's fine, but again, chances are if you go to a Chinese food restaurant, they're cooking with white pepper. But don't overdo it. White pepper can be very, very overpowering. So you have to be very, very careful with that you don't overuse it. So use it very sparingly. And then inside of this is our umami or MSG. And MSG is a naturally occurring crystal. There's a lot of talk about MSG. A lot of people say that MSG causes headaches and all sorts of other health concerns, but there's really no evidence that MSG does that. And MSG is really in a lot of things that we eat regularly. It's in chips, it's in all sorts of other foods. For some reason, it has gotten a bad rap, but the reality is just like salt. It's a naturally occurring crystal, and there's no evidence that it causes all the health problems that people say it does. And it adds a wonderful flavor to all of your cooking. We put MSG on a lot of our food, and I encourage you to do the same. We use it so much that we put it in a shaker and keep it on our counter. So, all right, so we are prepped and we are ready to start cooking. Okay, so we're at our final step of prep before we start cooking. This is what we call our mise en place, or everything is in its place. And this may seem a little bit obsessive, but it's extremely important for stir fry, because the cooking goes so incredibly fast and you're working with a pretty high heat. So you want to make sure that everything is right where you want it and right within reaching distance, so you don't have to like cut things or reach for things or whatever, because that could cause you to burn some food, and it's not ideal. So you want to make sure everything's right at hand, so you don't have to waste any time retrieving stuff. We're starting off with a very neutral oil, like vegetable oil or canola oil. This is canola oil. You want to make sure that you're using a neutral oil that can withstand the heat. Olive oil doesn't really like high heats, and it's got such a strong flavor that will kind of infuse itself into all of your foods. It's a wonderful oil to work with, but when you're working with high heats like in stir fry, it could cause some problems. So I encourage you to use neutral oil. And this is a little sesame oil, as I mentioned before. And a lot of people call it a finishing oil, but we like to cook with it a little bit too. Because I think it makes the food taste wonderful. I didn't talk at all about protein. If you want to use some protein, we're going to put a couple of eggs in there. I always break them before we start cooking, so you don't get any shell in your hurry to get the egg in the heat. And again, we've got our rice and our veggies and all that stuff, and our garlic. This is tofu. If you want to, we bake our tofu prior to it, so it's a little more firm. You don't have to use tofu. If you want to use chicken or beef or pork or whatever, I encourage you to start with that. Cook your protein first and then set it aside and just throw it in towards the end, because if you try to cook your protein with the rice, then that could again cause other ingredients to burn. So I encourage you to start with your protein, cook it first to the desired texture and flavor, and etc., and then throw it in towards the end. All right, let's get to cooking. So first thing you need to know, you don't need a wok. It's not necessary to have a wok. However, I recommend something deep, really deep, because you're going to be moving stuff around a lot. So there's going to be a lot of stirring and moving and stir fry. So you want to make sure that you have something deep and wide enough to handle everything you're going to put in. So I'm going to start with about a tablespoon of oil. And as mentioned before, you want to make sure that you use a neutral oil. This is canola, something that can handle the heat. And I'm not going to wait for it to heat up. It's going to get pretty hot pretty fast. I'm going to start with my garlic. And garlic's always a really good thing to start with, because the garlic is going to let you know if the oil is hot enough. So you can start with cold oil, because you don't want to. You want to make sure that you don't burn your garlic. So it's going to let you know if you see. You'll notice that it's already starting to sizzle a little bit, which is telling you the oil is getting up to heat, because you want your wok pretty hot for this. So you want to make sure that your oil is good and hot before you put anything else in it, and your garlic is going to kind of give you a good indication as to whether or not that's the case. So I've got my stove on pretty high heat. It's not all the way blasted up, but it's pretty hot. So at this point, you notice it's cooking pretty good, so I don't want to burn it. So I'm going to go in now with my egg. And a lot of people will scramble up their egg first. I don't do that. I just scramble it in the pan, so I break it up. Some people will actually make an omelet, or scramble it completely and then set it aside and throw it in later. If you like big chunks of egg, then I recommend you using that method instead. But I like it kind of infused with the rest of the meal, so I just make sure that it's kind of set before doing anything else. So it's not completely scrambled, but it's close to it. And then at that point, before it's completely cooked and completely scrambled, I go in with my rice. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take that rice and I'm going to mix that egg all in. Get all that yummy egginess and that eggy goodness inside your rice. And I'm going to let that rice fry up for a minute or so. And again, you want to make sure that your rice is broken up, so you don't have to break it up too much. And I'm going to kind of flatten that and spread it out so it cooks evenly. And give it a minute to fry up. And at this point, I'm going to go in with my onions. I always start the vegetables. I start with my onions, because I like my onions a little more cooked than the rest of my vegetables. I don't like big hunks of crunchy onion in my food. I'd rather my onion be a little more cooked than the rest of my vegetables. And if you notice, when I flipped it over, there's some little brown specks. That's your rice frying up. So I'm going to let my onion cook for just a second. As I mentioned, this process goes really fast. If things stick to your pan, don't stress, because we're about to deglaze it here in a second with some of our sauces. So now I'm going to go in with the rest of my vegetables. I've combined them all, so I don't have to take too much time. Hunting them down, reaching for them, etc. And the gailan, it looks like a lot. It looks like a lot of green, but that's gonna cook down quite a bit. As are your mushrooms. They're gonna cook down quite a bit. So now at this point, there's not a whole lot of cooking that needs to happen. It's just kind of mingling all your flavors. You just kind of want to give it a good stir, flip it up a little bit. I'm going to go in with your protein. Do the same thing. Kind of flip that around. And at this point, you're really done. I'm putting my MSG and my white pepper and my 5 spices. I'm going to go in with my sauce, and this is going to help deglaze and unstick your pan. And then I'm just going to make sure all those flavors are nice and blended. Making sure your protein is absorbing a lot of the liquid from your sauces and your spices and your flavors. They're all mingling together. And that's pretty much it. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to taste. Make sure all your spices are blended nicely. Okay, that's perfect. That's perfect. So you turn off your heat. Last thing you want to add is your green onion. They don't need a whole lot of time to cook. And you mix that up a little bit. And you're done. That's it. That's all it is. So it happens really, really fast. Prep is, takes a little bit of prep, but cooking time is, what did that take? 5 minutes? That's it. You're done. So I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed yourself. And if you have any ideas that work better for you or some tips for me, please let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck.